Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to Outrider 28, iThenticate and the Plagiarism Diagnostic for PhD students. Right, this is a positive Outrider, but most importantly, it's about you and you regaining control over your life, so that you have evidence to confirm research integrity and academic integrity. And you'll notice I'm talking a lot about evidence today. We can all say, oh yes, I've got research integrity, oh yes, I've got academic integrity. But what's your evidence for that? There's too much of this and not enough evidence and interpretation and analysis. And that's what we're doing today. Now, I know whenever plagiarism is used in a sentence, it is often followed by a yawn and or boredom. And I understand why, because for too many years, in fact, too many decades now, plagiarism has been used as a stick to hit, I hope metaphorically, students over the head. It's a word of fear, and it is used to frighten PhD students. And there are reasons for that fear. It is a legitimate fear because the penalties for plagiarism are incredibly harsh. If an examiner for your PhD or research masters finds plagiarism, then most of the policies around the world will savage you. You will frequently not be allowed to submit that thesis again for examination, and your candidature is over. So this is serious, and we all should be frightened. But I've argued for about 25 years now that we're not preparing our undergraduates or our postgraduates properly, particularly with regard to research integrity, academic integrity, but also information literacy. Students enroll in a higher degree program, they sort of seemingly write all these co-authored articles with people, they deliver conference proceedings and presentations, and they punch in a thesis and they punch out of a PhD program. Now, until very recently, PhDs and research master's degrees were not put through text matching software. So this meant that students would never know what their examiner would find through the examination process. They would not know if the examiner would find the evidence for research or academic misconduct. Wow. So as part of this milestone program that we're introducing at CDU starting from next year, yay excited, we are using text matching software, but we are using it in a really innovative way. We're using it in a way that is guided by the peer-reviewed literature today. We're not using it as a hammer to hit PhD students over the head. We are using it as a diagnostic, and that's the point of our Outrider today. Let's do this. At every single milestone at CDU, students will run a document through iThenticate software. Now, we're going to talk about iThenticate in a second, but what I'm trying to do is empower you to make sure that you can check and verify your documents for yourself. I'm returning the power to you. This is about academic integrity, and therefore I'm teaching you about note-taking and paraphrasing, using iThenticate as a diagnostic. You are supported throughout your candidature to understand iThenticate and its report. And so through your milestones, we work through the results that you receive from that software program. We're doing all of this. The reason we're doing all of this, spending all this time, is so that plagiarism is not a deal breaker through your examination process. So we're enacting a learning-led proxy to ensure that you gain the expertise you require in research integrity and academic integrity. So yes, this is part of your research training, part of your research education, but it's also part of your pathway and all of our pathways to an ethical researcher. Now, there is a very, 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 very small academic literature about the use of text matching software, particularly iThenticate, in doctoral education. And particularly it's a small literature when we use iThenticate as a diagnostic rather than a penalty. But can I say that research literature is excellent, and that is what we are using. And I need to acknowledge Ison's research here. This was really interesting, an historic study. Ison used Turnitin to examine 384 PhD theses submitted in the United States and Canada. The goal was to discover, and what an interesting hypothesis and research question this was, the goal was to discover if the PhD theses submitted before 1994 demonstrated a higher or a lower research misconduct breach, plagiarism. Now, why 1994? Interesting year to select, and I agree with it, by the way, because after 1994, digitisation and the internet started to proliferate through research much more effectively. So, in other words, Ison was investigating, is plagiarism increasing in doctoral research as the internet has proliferated through our research cultures? What a brilliant, brilliant topic. Now, what Ison discovered, and this will blow your head off, is of all the theses that they investigated, all those theses that were submitted, Ison discovered that half of them contained, quote, evidence of plagiarism, end of quote. Half. Now, that figure was constant through the historical period. So, in other words, plagiarism did not increase through PhDs as the internet and digitisation proliferated through research cultures. The research, therefore, has demonstrated so far, this historic research, is that plagiarism is pervasive in doctoral education. Okay, so let's now update this research and see what we can do about it. And I want to acknowledge Alistair McCulloch and his remarkable research and research career. And he has produced a fine article that we're using as a guide in CDU to show how often in doctoral education our understanding of plagiarism is binarised. So I need to also acknowledge the leadership of the University of South Australia in academic integrity discussions in this country. They, in many ways, have led the world for 2 decades. So my respect to all my colleagues at the University of South Australia. But Alistair confirmed that too often we have this sort of binarised response to academic integrity between, quote unquote, policing malpractice, end of quote, and, quote, improving research writing, end of quote. So let's now make a decision to move away from policing students, and let's focus on ethics, integrity, and improvement. Text matching software like Turnitin, like iThenticate, is best used in doctoral education as formative assessment. That is, formative tools to improve your academic writing. So let's look at the research now. So McCulloch et al.'s research looked particularly at HDR candidates and supervisors at the University of South Australia. And they used iThenticate, and their use of this particular software is important. They explored the role of iThenticate for PhD students and supervisors in enabling information literacy in candidates. So this is the study. What did they discover? They showed, firstly, and this is absolutely crucial, that the academic staff that did not use iThenticate could not see why it existed and did not recommend its use for their students. So as you can see, people without personal or professional expertise denied and devalued that personal and professional expertise in their students. The research also showed different patterns between supervisors and students in the use of iThenticate. And this was brilliant, I thought. Academic staff that did use it, they put pieces through once. And can I say, I do this too. So it was great to read it in the research that I'm not alone. So academic staff that use it put a piece through Authenticate once. Higher degree students use it differently. They submit and resubmit the same piece over and over again to investigate the improvement in their work. Isn't that brilliant? So students particularly submitted introductions and literature reviews in that repetitive fashion. Therefore, this study showed that for higher degree students, Authenticate enabled the development of writing and also an understanding of research integrity. Therefore, text matching software is best positioned not as a punitive system, but as a formative assessment. It is an educational tool to improve writing. Fabulous. So therefore, this is a positive moment in our lives. This is a moment where we are making a decision as staff, as students, to improve our work. So let's talk about Authenticate. Authenticate is a text matching software. It's owned by plagiarism.org, and they, of course, also own Turnitin. So one business owns the two best-known text matching software. Yeah. So it's important to recognise that plagiarism.org is a business. They gain from ensuring that plagiarism is a folk devil that frightens people. So they, as a corporation, gain money from that fear. So this is not a public utility. This is not a service. Universities and journals and a whole series of other organisations have to purchase this software. And as someone who actually approved the purchase of this software at CDU, can I say this is a very, very, very expensive bit of kit. This is a big commitment for any organisation that buys Authenticate. So just remember that Authenticate and Turnitin, this is not sort of a benevolent, vegan, groovy, pacifist type of vibe. This is a corporation that is feeding off the fear of plagiarism. They have gained their business model through increasing the fear of plagiarism. Now, this corporation, therefore, is based in Oakland in California, surprise, and Authenticate was released in 2004. But you may not have heard of it. And indeed, it's because it seemed to be sort of the less popular sister to Turnitin. Turnitin dominates undergraduate education. It is, as I describe it, Turnitin is the Toyota Celica of text matching software. But Authenticate is the Lexus of text matching software. Universities are not only the audience, for example, the World Health Organization uses Authenticate, the United Nations uses Authenticate, the World Bank uses Authenticate. So commercial and academic journals and publishers use this software. It's also trialled a series of innovations that are incredibly useful to researchers. So let me tell you about one crucial innovation in Authenticate that has changed my life, not only as a scholar, as a researcher, as a student myself, but also as a dean who has to investigate these plagiarism cases. Authenticate does something pretty spectacular. It allows us to assess what they call a document-to-document analysis. So what that means is you can upload one particular document and assess it directly against another document. So this stops all the talk about this person ripped me off, stops all of it. Okay, did they? Here it is, let's see. Thanks for playing. Now this enables all sorts of text matching possibilities for you. Not only can all sorts of pieces be assessed against each other, but we can compare, for example, an article that we write today with something that we wrote 5 years ago, which is quite important for self-plagiarism discussions that we'll get to in a second, but also say you're the first author on one article and you're the third author on an article from your lab mate looking at the same project. And the document to document allows you to assess your first authorship against your third authorship. Crucial. So any sort of text matching software, including IThenticate, is only as good as its database. And IThenticate has the largest and the fastest growing database. It works in multiple languages, which is crucial. It has phenomenal disciplinary coverage, which is crucial. And the reason in many ways I wanted CDU to go to Ithencate is because it is so effective with equations. So particularly for our colleagues in mathematics, I love the mathematicians, our colleagues in physics, hello. It is able finally to really engage with your work through all the equations and manage it properly. And, plagiarism.org needed Ithencate to do this. Turnitin simply can't do it. So Ithencate actually is running 4 databases. It checks firstly through the premium scholarly publications database. 96% of journals are covered here, and that is at this stage today 82 million refereed articles are checked. The second database is the Internet Archive, comparing your document with 90 plus billion web pages, with 22 million web pages being added every day. That's the second database. The third database is an interesting one, a really important one, the ProQuest database of dissertations and theses. Over 1 million dissertations are checked in multiple languages. Currently, ProQuest is working in 35 languages, but that's expanding all the time. And the fourth database is the one that just blows your head off. That's the private repository. This is the amazing one. We can add specific documents and do direct checks between them. So if I am managing a plagiarism case and a student or a supervisor, but say a student says, my supervisor is ripping me off, then I can compare these 2 documents in time and assess what's going on and present that evidence to both parties. Okay. Importantly, 1,500 global publishers are now using Ithencate. So to be frank, one of the other reasons I introduced it for our students at CDU is wherever you go, in public or private corporations, whatever publishing you do, you're going to have to confront Ithencate. So part of my role is to make sure you have exposure and use of that in your doctoral program. Therefore, what we're trying to make sure at CDU is that you not only gain sort of exposure to Ithencate, but you gain expertise with it. And look, it is an incredibly intuitive database, and unlike Turnitin, and again, this is crucial, Ithencate does not save your document. Now, this is the bit where I was always a bit uncomfortable with Turnitin, and I can say it now that we're not using it at CDU in the doctoral space. But what happened with Turnitin is students would upload their document into the Turnitin Borg cube, and unless they clicked draft, so putting it in draft mode, then Turnitin would grab that thesis and put it in the Borg cube, and it would be used to check other people's theses and other people's work. So in many ways, yes, we were checking students, but Turnitin also gained from all those people putting in their theses to then check against other people. So it became part of their corporation, part of their business, and expanded out their reach. Now, Ithencate doesn't do that. There's no saving into the Borg cube. The student, the researcher, all of us, we maintain control over our uploads. Nothing is saved. Terrific. Now, the results of the University of South Australia, that study we talked about a little while ago, confirmed that when asked, and this will change your life, when asked, 89% of HDR students stated that Ithencate helped them prevent plagiarism. 89%. 64% of staff, of supervisors stated it helped them prevent their student from plagiarising. Brilliant. And half of the academics were generous enough to recognise, half of them, that actually Ithencate stopped them committing plagiarism. Brilliant. So as you can see, this is really formative learning. This is moving students and staff away from sort of like detecting plagiarism to preventing it. Indeed, at the University of South Australia, 80% of staff and students agreed that iThenticate had improved their writing. This consciousness has been created because there's this realisation that the development of high quality research writing emerges when we spend a lot of time thinking about paraphrasing and making sure that this sort of inadvertent paraphrasing isn't actually plagiarism. For me, that's the crucial discussion we all need to be having. And 85% of the University of South Australia staff and students confirmed that iThenticate improved their paraphrasing. 85%. Okay. We're also saying, but again, that's a small study in a small university, in a small state, in a small country. What's the generalisability? Well, I also saw a great study in Mexico of how iThenticate has been used in an online doctoral program. And Ortiz et al. Confirmed that, and this was even more startling, students moved from a 90% detection rate to a 20% detection rate through the program, through the use of iThenticate as a formative assessment. So this leads me to our final few comments about iThenticate for you, for our remarkable, important higher degree students. The first thing I need to say to you is ignore the number. Let me explain. Too often, and this is a leftover, I think, from undergraduate education and the use of Turnitin, the students get terribly involved in the percentage match, that scary red number at the top of the Turnitin report. What can I say? In our space, ignore the number. The number, to be frank, is not actually terribly meaningful. Students and supervisors and deans, people like me, need to go through every line of that thesis. It's not about a single number. We go through every line to check for the matches. So let me give you an example of this. And I have seen this, by the way. I have stopped a thesis being sent out and had this corrected. So a thesis may have a 1% match. 1%. So you go, oh, terrific. That's a great result. But actually, a 1% result can show that one paragraph in a big thesis is actually plagiarised. And I have seen that, by the way, where 1%, you go to page 126 and there's an entire paragraph that the student thought they were paraphrasing and actually they plagiarised. And in that case, it was probably pretty lucky I caught it because that particular quote, and it was a quote, came from the person that was being sent to that was an examiner. Okay, so 1%, you need to check every line. That 1% could be a crucial 1% that you're actually plagiarising. But then let's go to the top end of town. Say you get a result of like 77%. Always scares people. But, say what you've done at 77%, you accidentally forgot to not include your quotations and your reference list at the end. Okay, you can, by the way, exclude quotes and exclude the reference list at the end. But say you didn't. So what's happened in the 77% is all the legitimately configured quotations have been picked up and the references have been picked up. Well, when you go through it, you can see that. That's great. Great check, not a worry. Now, you also might have a high percentage of matching because you've published from your thesis, right? And we'll talk about self-plagiarism in a second. But some journals make huge mistakes and they use what's called a cut-off number. So they have a particular number that they focus on and that creates a desk rejection. So that's a desk reject if it reaches a certain number. That is absolutely and completely wrong, and it is, to be frank, ridiculous. Therefore, we need to, in scholarly communities, start this robust and caring and compassionate conversation about information literacy. And we need to do it today and tomorrow and next week and next year so that we are using this software as formative diagnostics rather than as a summative judgment. It's not meant to be used like that. Finally, I want to talk to you about the challenging bit of this story, and that is self-plagiarism. Now, I've done a lot of research on self-plagiarism in the last 10 years. with or without the inverted commas, it's a fun gig. Now, the literature around self-plagiarism is growing exponentially, and I note the recent article by Marcello Crosco conflating, sadly, self-plagiarism and plagiarism as sort of being the same thing in the use of iThenticate, and that's not right. But even up to 5 years ago, some students and some supervisors in some disciplines got away with sort of slamming together. They published 3 articles, slammed it together in a thesis, often in the original formatting from the journal with sort of a short intro, a short conclusion, and really random referencing styles, and then sent that out to examiners. Now, of course, they were the times of dial-a-mate examiners, so there's the supervisor, staple a few things together, send it out, hope for the best, dial-a-mate examiner, thanks for playing. But now, of course, we have proper regulations for examination, and dial-a-mate is no longer possible. So we need to recognise the changes that are occurring in the genre of a PhD and the changes that are occurring in academic publishing, because corporate academic publishers have taken over our world with all sorts of changes to copyright around your publications and around knowledge. Situations get very, very sticky when students think they've got the right to their own research when it's been published in particular corporate journals. The days are gone where you can take an article as you published it and whack it into your thesis because you may have signed away your right to use that article in that form. Remember, copyright controls what is yours, what is your article, what is your chapter. So be really clear when you're signing that agreement with Taylor and Francis or Springer or Elsevier. When you're signing that agreement, read it. Don't be so, I've got an article, yay! And that's great, I understand that. But be really clear what you're signing away because it varies enormously. Now, frequently you are allowed to use what's often called the green version or the Word document before you sent it to the publisher. So the publisher owns the form and content of that article as it appeared in the journal. But frequently you're allowed to use the Word version of that article before you sent it to the publisher. To add even more complexity to this conversation, self-plagiarism has become like this new problem that we need to log in doctoral education. Self-plagiarism, I've described in my research, is the, quote, unicorn of plagiarism. Now, I've used unicorn because it's a mythic or imaginary creature. Right. Because if you think about it, what self-plagiarism is it's reusing your own work. It's yours. It's reusing your own work. But some interpretations of self-plagiarism at the moment include you've published an article during your candidature and then you present it in your PhD. That's self-plagiarism. Now, obviously, this is complete nonsense, but I have seen examiner after examiner after examiner call this self-plagiarism. Okay, so if your supervisor has not stayed current with the changing copyright laws that exist around academic journals, or they haven't kept up with this self-plagiarism conversation, let me tell you how to help. Right. Firstly, you need to use iThenticate throughout your entire candidature. You need to use it as a diagnostic tool to verify what is your work. Now, on your co-authored work, oh my goodness me, check that your writing has not been submitted in some other form in another article where you are a co-author. As you can see, this is real and quite frightening for me. Some great scholars have been stopped when this has happened. Okay, so let me provide the scenario for you. For many supervisors, they have a series of students working basically on the same project, okay? Often a funded project, and it's salami sliced up. So each individual student is working on a little bit of that project. And that's great, that's okay, as long as the boundaries between those salami slices are patrolled and carefully. The challenge can emerge when you are the first author on an article that's your research from the lab, and that's great, but you're the second or the third author on a colleague's article in the lab, okay? You need to check the relationship between those publications before you submit that work in your PhD. Remember, iThenticate tests and checks most journals, that's great, but it also allows you to put up two different objects, two different publications, and check them against each other. Now, for the methods section in the experimental sciences, this is absolutely crucial, okay? So just check you're first author on one, second, third, fourth author on another. That's okay, that's cool. But just check the wording and the language for methods in particular. Maybe literature reviews, but mostly methods. Secondly, there is one clear strategy to manage self-plagiarism. That is, you take the article as it was published in a journal, you make it a Word document, you write a fresh introduction and conclusion, and through this new writing, you show how this research operates in your thesis, how it confirms your SOC, your significant original contribution to knowledge, and then you must self-cite. So at the end of that first sentence in this chapter that was the article, put a little explanatory footnote, one of those cute little numbers, and use in the explanatory footnote text something like this, quote, "An earlier version of this research appeared in," and list the exact reference where that article appeared. So the way we manage self-plagiarism is self-citation. Now, I despise self-citation, but even I've had to use it in the last 5 years to show how this idea has moved through my career in the last 20 years, okay? So this is now the sort of level of patrolling that's occurring. So yes, always remember the silliness of self-plagiarism. Plagiarism, as defined by Salisi, was, quote, "the unethical way of using others' creative work, words, and text," end of quote. But self-plagiarism refers to you nicking your own stuff. So that means, let's just use another metaphor in life. Your car is parked in a garage. And then you take your car out of that garage. That's theft. Yeah, this is obviously rubbish. But as we talked about in the last Outrider, plagiarism is an historical term. And at this point in space and time in our history, self-plagiarism is a thing. Therefore, use iThenticate as your friend, as a tool, as a diagnostic capacity that exists in your doctoral program. PhDs are meant to be tough. That's why they are an elite qualification. 1% of the world can do a PhD. Therefore, make sure that you are reading the highest quality, verified scholarship, and that you are writing with clarity, precision, and care. We could focus endlessly on plagiarism and collusion, but what I'd ask all of us, let's make a decision today to focus on iThenticate to teach. And what it's teaching are the foundational skills for information literacy. As Caroline Essner and the remarkable Martha Vincinis confirmed, plagiarism is not really a simple formation. It has connections with copyright law, with notions of citation, attribution, permission. One goal, and there are many that exist in a doctoral program, but one goal is to make sure at the end of all of this that you are an ethical researcher. These are learned skills. So the time has come for us all to recognise and to value information literacy as a formative skill set. And this formative skill set will enable your development as an outstanding researcher. I wish you love, light, and peace. T out.